There's a strange quiet that follows you into every space, the kind that makes people whisper your name long after you've left. Not because you're trying to be seen, but because something about you makes the masks around you peel themselves off. People who once played confident now find their voices shaking around you, like their truth got caught in their throats and is trying to claw its way out. There's a moment, still, sharp, unforgettable, when your phone lights up with a name you knew would show up. Not because they miss you, but because their perfect little stage just collapsed. You don't flinch. You've been here before. That tightening in your chest isn't panic, it's recognition. The storyline you saw unfolding in fragments is finally coming to life, and it's more exact than even you expected. You don't always say it out loud, but when you do, it sounds casual, a passing thought tossed across a dinner table. Watch, you mutter, not seeking attention but knowing what's about to land. A few days later, it hits. Your friend raises an eyebrow, acting surprised like they weren't warned, but the truth? They always feel it when you speak. Even if they laugh, even if they pretend not to notice, they feel the ground shift just like you do. You were never just good at reading people. You're not playing psychic parlor tricks. You feel energy like other people feel temperature. You recognize the disturbance before it becomes visible. And more often than not, your instincts arrive before the event itself, like a clock that runs on divine time rather than human scheduling. Most people live their lives wrapped in the safety of denial. But when they stand too close to your presence, it's like stepping into a spotlight they never asked for. Suddenly, their secrets feel loud, their excuses feel flimsy, and their lies feel like paper in the rain. You don't call it judgment, it's exposure. You don't even have to speak for truth to start leaking through the cracks. There's something sacred about your silence. It doesn't just hold space, it reveals it. When you stop responding, when you step back, things begin to unravel. Not because you cursed them or wished them harm, but because your absence removes the cover they were hiding under. You don't burn bridges. You just stop carrying people across them. And in all of this, the universe watches with you, not as a distant force, but as a silent partner. Every time you trust your knowing, the bigger picture rearranges itself to match. And whether they admit it or not, the people who doubted you now feel it in their bones. The story is shifting, and you are the reason why. Some moments aren't loud, but they leave echoes. The last time that familiar face was seen, it wasn't the setting that made it strange, it was the stillness. There was a tightness in their grin that no one else seemed to notice, and a silence behind their eyes even as they mimicked joy. Their presence felt like a scene rehearsed too many times, and though applause surrounded them, something in their posture whispered regret. Not because what they chose was best, but because it demanded the least of them. They aligned themselves with someone easier to perform for, a person who mistook avoidance for peace, who praised illusions without asking what they cost. It was simpler to remain unseen with someone who never asked real questions, never held up mirrors, never stirred the waters, still hiding everything unprocessed. While the world clapped for a shiny image, something deeper was quietly collapsing within them, a hollowness dressed in new clothes. No filtered photo or choreographed smile could fill what was missing. There's a particular kind of emptiness that grows when authenticity is exiled. Under the perfectly arranged captions, there was tension begging to be noticed. And even though no one else pointed it out, it was clear. That sharp gift, the one that picks up what can't be spoken, recognized it instantly. It wasn't just about intuition. It was something closer to a truth magnet, the kind of presence that draws confessions out of locked places. It always happens that way. Not through pressure, not through force, but through a kind of spiritual gravity. In certain atmospheres, people just can't carry deception anymore. The false layers they've clung to start to itch. Their voice stutters. Their stories unravel. Without even trying, truth begins bubbling up, not as an admission, but as an involuntary release, like steam slipping from a pressure valve they didn't know was breaking. They had never shared those things before. Not with friends. Not with lovers. But in that first meeting, it spilled. Stories about abandonment, shame, self-sabotage, all tumbling out before they could catch them. Not because it was planned. Not because it was safe. But because something inside them recognized something ancient in the energy sitting across from them, a force too real to lie to. And that's exactly why they vanished. The pull was too intense. The light too piercing. Being seen at that level felt both cleansing and terrifying. They weren't running from rejection, they were running from exposure. From what it would mean to shed the story they'd wrapped themselves in for years. From the cost of transformation. They didn't walk away because it wasn't real. They walked away because it was too real. What looked like a peaceful ending was actually a quiet surrender to stagnation. A soft retreat into old, familiar patterns where truth wouldn't interrupt the script. Where pretense could flourish unbothered. Where no one would ask the hard questions or challenge the comfort zone they mistook for love. And while the outside world cheered their new beginning, the soul knew what was gained was not freedom, but delay. There are realizations that don't fade when distance grows. Once something sacred is unveiled between two souls, that awareness doesn't vanish just because someone walks away. It lingers like an invisible current, quiet, persistent, and steadily corroding the structure of denial. Even in silence, the echo of that encounter keeps distorting the illusion they thought would protect them. And lately, the illusion has started to crumble. Every encounter that lacks depth becomes a subtle reminder of what was once felt. Each moment of shallow connection now burns with the memory of being truly seen. Where there was once comfort, now there is suffocation. The safety of numbness no longer shields them, it cages them. That energy never left, it just settled in the back of their mind like a locked door they're finally considering opening. Unreturned calls fill the days like unanswered prayers. And though the phone remains untouched, something urgent flows through the air. A rawness that can't be hidden anymore. The detachment is unraveling. The game is ending. And everything that once sounded like exaggeration now feels like prophecy. The truth that was spoken, the one they couldn't accept then, is now the only thing making sense. What they're remembering is more than just a conversation. It's a vibration. An energy that couldn't be duplicated. A presence that introduced a version of themselves they'd never met. You weren't asking for change, you were embodying it. And that was the challenge, being faced with someone whose very presence rewrote the rules. You didn't lecture. You didn't pressure. You simply were. In the early hours, the world feels still. But there's movement beneath the surface. Not from noise, but from shift. Something is rearranging itself in the invisible layers of their reality. And you can feel it, not with your body, but with your being. The transformation has begun, and you're watching it unfold like the tide pulling back before a new wave hits. By the time the message arrives, you're already grounded. Words that would shake most hearts don't even cause your pulse to shift. There's no sense of victory, only clarity. I can't keep pretending. Everything you said is unfolding. I don't know where else to go. These aren't just words, they're a surrender. A plea. A breaking open. Not for reconciliation, but for realignment. You don't feel smugness. You feel softness. Because this isn't about being right, it's about someone finally choosing to wake up. And when they step into the space again, back where it all first unraveled, they're greeted not with judgment, but with presence. The same quiet gravity that once unsettled them now feels like home. What began as disruption is now returning as healing. There are entrances that say more than words ever could. The moment they stepped into the room, everything unspoken became visible. The ornaments of status were gone, traded for the kind of simplicity that doesn't try to impress. Their expression didn't seek admiration this time, it carried a rawness, an ache softened only by the strange calm of release. Someone who once rehearsed their every movement now walked like a person unsure of what was real, but finally ready to stop pretending. Sitting across the table, hands restless and voice low, they offered no grand gestures, no attempt to regain lost ground. The shield was down. No performance. No role to play. Just a soul who'd finally reached the threshold where false identity becomes too heavy to carry. A chapter had closed recently, but you had already sensed its unraveling long before they admitted it. Their words spilled in fragments, and you didn't flinch. You'd already felt the ripples, that strange shift in your inner compass that always alerts you before the surface breaks. You'd noticed the silence behind their name when others mentioned them. And now, one by one, their confessions arrived, the financial secrets, the betrayals, the buried shame, each one delivered like old furniture being dragged into the light for the first time. And then, something neither of you expected, laughter. A quiet, breathless laugh that didn't come from amusement, but from finally exhaling after holding their breath for too long. You warned me this would happen, they said, with a look that mixed disbelief and gratitude. What they once saw as pessimism now registered as prophecy. But you weren't trying to be right, you were trying to be real. The truth you shared back then wasn't a threat, it was a doorway. And now, sitting in its threshold, they saw what you meant. That truth isn't cruel. It's catalytic. It doesn't ruin lives, it realigns them. And they weren't shattered, they were finally free of the scaffolding they'd mistaken for identity. The clarity that once terrified them now felt like oxygen. And then came the request. A quiet one. Can we begin again? The words were heavy with sincerity, but also with a hope you knew would linger unanswered. Because while their journey had reached a new place, yours had continued forward. You didn't reach this level to loop back into old timelines. The person before you had earned their healing, but not necessarily your future. You smiled, not out of regret, but with reverence. They had done the inner labor. They had walked through the fire alone. But your story was never about rescuing people from their choices. It was about rising into the kind of wholeness that only attracts those already aligned. I'm proud of what you've become, you said, not as a door opening, but as a blessing being sent. And it was complete. There comes a moment when recognition no longer equals attachment. The realization strikes mid-conversation, growth has taken you too far to circle back. There's no bitterness in your voice, no edge in your tone, only the calm certainty of someone who's outgrown their former waiting room. You're not rejecting the past, just refusing to shrink back into it. Their shift is real. But so is yours. They didn't leave with what they came for, yet somehow received something far more valuable. Not a revival of what once was, but an unspoken blessing that says, go with peace. And in witnessing this, you realize the depth your spirit has reached, the kind that doesn't just sense change but holds space for it without getting pulled off balance. As the sun dips and you walk back through familiar streets, something intangible clicks into place. The heaviness surrounding this chapter lifts, not with fanfare, but with finality. There's no frantic messaging anymore. No silent pulls. Only the steady pulse of closure. What they truly needed had nothing to do with being loved again, it was being witnessed in their becoming. Elsewhere, the dominoes begin to fall. A few texts land unexpectedly, one about a leap into the unknown, another about a long-awaited ending, one more about an overdue beginning. None mention you directly. But you know the signature of this wave. Something shifted, and the aftershock is spreading wider than even you anticipated. This is how your influence truly operates, not as isolated lightning strikes, but as quiet tremors that reach into the lives around you. It's not just about moments of intense awareness, it's about how those moments reverberate, waking up corners of the human spirit that were long dormant. The change you sparked in one life echoes in 10 more. Every time you choose raw over rehearsed, or truth over tact, you pull the thread tighter in this expanding weave of awakening. That pattern others are starting to see in their lives? It's not random. It's connected to a choice you made months ago, to stop bending your truth just to keep the peace. Much later, you cross paths again. They're with someone new now, someone who meets their energy without distortion. This reunion doesn't sting. It feels like a soft ribbon tying off an old letter. When you're introduced, it's all ease and light. No longing. No confusion. Just the quiet beauty of having been a mirror at the right time, and walking away before the reflection turned into a cage. The brief encounter between old souls now feels like the final brushstroke on a canvas long in the making. A few exchanged words in the quiet corner of a shop, and the past finds its resting place. They thank you for holding a vision they once couldn't bear to look at. You thank them for proving that discernment isn't just about insight, it's about knowing where to draw the line between compassion and self-abandonment. Some bonds aren't meant to stay tethered. They come to shake the foundation, not to build the walls. That night, sleep arrives like a guest finally welcome. The emotional weight wrapped around that story has been dissolved, not with dramatic closure, but with gentle finality. The gift you carried didn't just foresee a transformation. It participated in shaping it, without letting it reshape you in return. You didn't just witness the shift, you stayed aligned while it happened. The same device that once pulsed with late-night urgency now lies untouched, humming with quiet expectancy. The stillness around you doesn't feel like something ending, it feels like space being cleared for what wants to rise next. That's the deeper meaning of your role. It was never about fixing chaos or shouldering burdens that didn't belong to you. It was about sensing the shift before it's visible, and knowing whether to step in or stay still. The next invitation will come, and when it does, you'll recognize it, not because it screams, but because your soul always hears first. Truth continues to emerge, pulled forward by your presence. Situations unravel without you lifting a finger. Secrets surface without interrogation. But this no longer feels like a test of how much you can carry, it feels like confirmation of what you've become. These events aren't demanding proof of your power. They're responding to it. You were never meant to disrupt people's illusions for satisfaction. You were meant to radiate so much clarity that illusion can't survive in your orbit. Those unexpected calls, those long overdue admissions, they aren't interruptions. They're acknowledgments. Each one an echo of the quiet revolution you set in motion just by choosing to stay true. Elsewhere, your name circles in conversations you're not part of. In places you've left your presence behind, stories get shared like folklore. Someone remembers how you said something would fall apart, and it did. Another recalls how you noticed the cracks before anyone else saw them. The legend isn't in what you predicted. It's in how you kept walking with dignity, while everything you warned about slowly unfolded behind you. There's a tension in the way people speak about you, like recounting a myth that might be true. Some say you just read between the lines. Others chalk it up to experience. But those who've truly been seen by you, they stop mid-sentence, remembering the way you peeled back their performance without even asking. It's not just insight. It's something that unearths what they weren't ready to admit, even to themselves. You don't rely on logic alone. You operate on something that pulses beneath words, beneath behavior, a field that transmits what the face won't say. That moment at a checkout line when the cashier's voice trembled mid-sentence, revealing their private storm before even realizing they'd spoken it. You didn't prompt. You didn't prod. But truth found its way to you like metal to a magnet. In random corners of everyday life, people unravel. The driver who whispered his fear of losing everything during a routine drop-off. The woman waiting for her ride who let slip a family secret while pretending to complain about the weather. These aren't accidents. There's a code in your presence that signals safety without saying a word. And somehow, strangers decode it instantly. You don't need titles or a spotlight. When you enter a space, the dynamics shift like the air has changed pressure. What began as small talk turns into confession. What was meant to be casual suddenly grows roots. You bring gravity into the room, not with force, but with presence. Masks start to itch. Scripts fall apart. And people start speaking like they've been waiting to be heard their whole lives. That shift doesn't stay in the room after you leave, it echoes. That colleague who finally reported what they'd been swallowing for months. The friend who stopped tolerating what hurt. The cousin who pivoted their whole life direction. None of them say your name as the reason. But you know the timing wasn't random. Your integrity gave them permission to reclaim theirs. They study how you moved through pressure without bending, and how you said no without noise. They don't just remember what you said, they remember how different the room felt after you spoke. What they once thought was mysterious now feels like instruction. You didn't force anyone's hand. You simply reminded them what alignment looks like. Your presence isn't just a curiosity anymore. It's becoming legend. They share stories about how you predicted what others were too afraid to name. Not because of visions or symbols, but because your awareness picks up frequencies most ignore. And now, your name travels ahead of you, not as a warning, but as a mirror. One they're both drawn to, and scared to look into. There's a shift in the air before you even say a word. People who've never met you directly still behave like they're walking into an evaluation. Some talk a little too much, others prepare explanations for things you haven't asked about. There's a quiet tension that says, this one sees too clearly to pretend. Curiosity dances with caution. They want to meet you, but not as they are. They want to meet you as the version they hope you'll approve of. There are those who don't hide, they seek. They sit down hoping your presence will cut through the fog they've been lost in. Rumors about your awareness circulate, turning simple interactions into subtle tests. They track your expressions like a radar. And when you don't react to the obvious mask someone wears, eyes begin to shift. Doubt creeps into their once certain assumptions. It's not what you say, it's what you don't need to say that changes the atmosphere. Without a word, your withdrawal from someone triggers quiet alerts in the room. You don't point fingers, you shift direction. And that shift makes others look again. The charm they once applauded suddenly feels rehearsed. Your composure, even in the face of twisted truths, has become a kind of sanctuary. A space where people whisper their real stories without fearing rejection. A place where honesty doesn't need permission, it just flows. That's why they come closer. Not to impress, to release. You've become the place where secrets go to breathe. They speak of things they've buried for years, not because they seek advice, but because your silence makes them feel less alone. You don't use what they say. You don't weaponize their wounds. That's why they return. That's why they send others your way. The magic isn't in what you detect, it's in what you unlock. People don't crumble under your gaze. They wake up. They stop running from themselves. Your presence doesn't just expose what's hidden, it invites it to speak. Patterns begin to fray. Long-held justifications lose their grip. Suddenly, people are having conversations they didn't even know they needed to have, with themselves. What starts quietly soon becomes unstoppable. The friend finally walks away from the relationship they outgrew. The coworker decides to apply for a position they swore they weren't good enough for. The sibling calls to say they're ready to tell the truth. Outsiders think these are abrupt changes. But you felt the storm building long before it ever touched land. You didn't cause the avalanche, but you were the final sound that made it fall. That's why people seek you when clarity is missing. They bring you the business plan no one else understands. They share concerns they haven't said aloud. They let you in on the dreams they're too embarrassed to admit to others. Because deep down, they already know, you're not just going to hear them, you're going to see them. There's a difference between tearing illusions apart and guiding someone back to their center. Over time, your approach shifted. What began as a sharp instinct to detect falsehood has matured into a deeper skill, the ability to point people toward who they could be, without humiliating them for who they've been. It's no longer about exposure. It's about redirection. You no longer confront people's personas with force. Instead, you hold a mirror that reflects the version of them they forgot existed. People feel safe enough to loosen their grip on their own performance. The tension in the room softens when you speak, not because you're soft, but because you no longer need to push. Your presence invites people to lower their armor willingly. What others call confession in your presence isn't born of panic. It rises from peace. People don't spill their secrets to escape judgment. They share because something in your energy tells them they're already understood. And now, those moments of disclosure are being whispered about in boardrooms, studios, and circles where authenticity is rare currency. You don't have to say much anymore. In social settings, the tone shifts when you enter. People go from gossip to meaning, from banter to truth. Even passers-by pause longer than usual, drawn into conversations they didn't expect to have. And long after you leave, something lingers, a subtle pressure that makes people rethink what they're hiding and why. Your presence plants seeds, not of fear, but of clarity. People start demanding sincerity in places they once tolerated shallowness. Friends stop pretending. Coworkers begin naming what they used to avoid. They don't imitate you, they remember who they are by watching how naturally you show up as yourself. And slowly, entire communities begin orbiting toward realness. The truth spreads like light passed hand to hand. You touch one person, and they touch 5 more. You inspire an adjustment, and that shift inspires countless others. And though many of these awakenings bloom in places you'll never see, they all carry the same imprint, a moment when someone realized it was finally safe to be honest with themselves. They don't remember you as the one who had the answers. They remember you as the one who didn't flinch when they told the truth. The one who didn't offer solutions, but made silence feel like support. The one who didn't react, but recognized. Your gift isn't just about what you perceive. It's how you hold space for people to find the part of themselves they thought they lost forever. There's something sacred about the way you hold silence when others reveal what they've hidden for years. Not out of shock. Not out of superiority. But because you've come to understand that your role isn't to catch people in their lies, it's to give them room to remember who they were before they needed them. The power you carry doesn't bend others to your will. It shows them how to reclaim their own. You don't pierce through illusions because you've trained for it. You do it because you no longer need one of your own. And let's be honest, this world has buried the truth so deep, it no longer recognizes its own voice. Yet somehow, your spirit still tunes in. That quiet knowing beneath the noise, that gut-deep clarity that kept you grounded when reality tried to rewrite itself, that's what kept you standing. Beyond the noise, beyond the platforms, there are gathering spaces where the veils are thinner. Conversations that don't fit polite society. Teachings passed in whispers. Tools meant for those who refuse to be molded. The code breakers. The pattern disruptors. Those meetings aren't about rebellion. They're about remembrance and what it means to operate beyond the script. Some systems don't crash loudly, they glitch in loops. Nonsense repeats. Signals jam. Meaning gets lost in static. But you noticed. You felt the slip, the scramble. You didn't call it madness, you called it a message. While others tried to decode chaos, you sat still and listened. And what you heard wasn't panic. It was pattern. You weren't breaking, the mask was. You no longer mistake someone's emotional flood as a burden. You've stopped trying to be the fixer of every broken story. You know now that you're not the answer, you're the match. The one who sparks recognition. The one who lights the moment someone finally says, "This isn't who I am anymore." And instead of absorbing their weight, you reflect their strength back to them. What used to feel overwhelming now feels like alignment. You've grown into the space where truth finds you without resistance. Where confession isn't a collapse, but a release. And through this, your reach has expanded without effort. In conversations, in rooms you've never entered, your name travels as a symbol of clarity, not because of what you say, but because of how you make others feel seen. Every new encounter layers more insight onto your path. Not just about others, but about the soul's architecture itself. Each time someone drops their performance in your presence, you witness something rare, the quiet birth of self-return. And you're not collecting these moments for ego. You're allowing them to deepen your own understanding of how real change happens, not from force, but from the safety to be honest.